We're delighted that Gavin is going to be presenting on an artist's and mathematician's eye into the mysteries of creation and co-creation. So over to you, Gavin.
Well, good morning. Thanks to the organisers and Finn. And the first slide is actually probably the essence of my whole talk, which I think flows rather beautifully from Addis's brief discussion of process relational theology that we've just had. So I'm glad to be following him. I think it's through parenthood and human creativity that we can best glimpse what God is, what the Creator God is. Back in Genesis chapter 1, the Elohim speaks of humankind as created in the image of Elohim. And what is it that shines through every day of that humanly creative week? It's creativity. Elohim is creativity. I am made in imago creatoris. I am made to co-create. Excuse me. So how are we going to infer things about divine action and our co-creativity without using these basic models, parenthood and artists? The otherness and the gracious distancing of the Elohim, this is the paradox, the presence and intimate companionship of the Yahweh Elohim in Genesis 2 are both reflected in parenthood, as most of us know. Divine grace lets me go, but it also never lets me go. And just so, the creatures of an artist's making are allowed to be fully themselves, radically, even stubbornly other than the artist. And yet they can be gloriously expressive of some aspect of the artist's very self. Now, excuse me, if this sounds incredible for the art of mathematics making, which I guess it will for most of you, just wait and I'll try and make the case. Right, God is near and God is far. Far beyond the universe, and all positive assertions about what God is have constantly to be hedged and guarded by negatives. God is not. Approaching the mystery of God's relationship with the universe, I'm using these four paradoxical dualities of Judeo-Christian thought, roughly characterized as relational, ontological, spatial, and temporal. The who, what, where, and why, if you like. I will show that each is reflected in the relationship between the mathematician or the artist and the things they make. So let's take infinite and personal. Artists, like God, but unlike parents, are outside, infinitely distant from the world of their creatures. But artists are like wise and caring parents in being fiercely defensive of their creatures. They feel deeply with them, while allowing them to fulfill their destiny in the artwork as a whole. A good novelist loves every character, while granting them fully assertive personhood. A good composer cares about each transient note. She will not tolerate a wrong note, nor criticism of a right note. You can see, if you watch a composer conducting their own symphony, in their face there's the personal investment. An artist may indeed be too personally involved to cheerfully accept objective critique. But mathematicians too can be invested in their abstract characters and concepts. We expend ourselves on them. We love them. We may rejoice or grieve over their successes and failures, and we exercise a stern justice when necessary. But we too can be stubborn about relinquishing our ideals and our conjectures. So next to maker and upholder. What kind of thing is art? An artwork may be judged alone for what it is, but it's primarily an act of communication, sometimes directly between artist and audience, and sometimes mediated by third parties. A Beethoven symphony is a composed entity made once and for all. Yet it's not in the bare score that the thing exists for us, is it? It's in the performances mediated by players, conductors, sound engineers, and broadcasters. A piece of music is sustained in time by continued performances, interpretations, transcriptions, arrangements. And the characters of a novel live through successive editions and sustained readership, films, sequels, and in human consciousness. And what is mathematics? An idea can exist in the mind of a mathematician long before being expressed, developed, incarnated in a shareable theory. Sometimes mathematics appears as something given that we can point to, a body of theorems. But the most acceptable definition is simply the dynamic one. It's what mathematicians do. It's an ongoing adventure in time. And the warrant of good mathematics is upheld by a sustained and actively communicating community. The traditional dogmatist view of mathematical theorems and definitions as indubitably proven once and for all is giving way to a recognition of a more human cultural process of ongoing interactions, dubbed by Lakatos proofs and refutations. Mathematics is in the being and in the doing, in the happening, in the becoming. Transcendent and immanent. Artists may aspire to universal, transcendent, Platonic ideals of goodness and pathos and beauty existing beyond our world, but for most of us the joy and appreciation of beauty is aroused in and through the artwork. It's in the real, teeming reality around us, inspiring, innovating us. We must transcend the world to apprehend the ideals, and we must stand back to appreciate artworks from an objective distance, but we evoke the muses to try and express this living, active experience of beauty and rightness. Again, in mathematics, there is the Platonic vision of an abstract world, discovered by transcending this world. But we are deeply aware of dependence on the vision and understanding of a human community in which the true ideals are immanent. And we are regularly reminded of how wonderfully the abstract world is reflected in, immanent in, nature. Mathematicians oscillate perpetually between two psychological poles, the constructivist and the Platonist, the consciousness of creating mathematics and the sense of discovering it. Eternal and contemporary. The artist can often see the end in the beginning, but has to live in and through the implementation and incarnation of the artwork in time. And an author of a novel lives and suffers with the characters, although conceived, fully formed in the beginning. The composer, conducting her own symphony, sees the work from eternity, but is bringing it into concrete realization through the artistry of the players. Mathematicians, too, can sometimes glimpse the form of a complete and perfect theory in their head, but they know there is hard work to do in time. We may talk like Paul Erdős did of the book existing beyond time with the perfect theorems and proofs to be aspired to, but we persist in naming results like Euler's theorem or Galois theory, identifying the mathematics with human creators. And we talk about old and new results, and we have seen too many past definitions and results subsumed under deeper and more elegant theories, and too many dramatically simplified proofs to be sure ever of absolute perfection and finality. And we watch others running with our ideas, usually with pleasure, our pleasure, developing them, applying them, often much later. All talk of God is, yes, ultimately metaphorical and analogical. Approaching the mystery of creation begins, as I said, with the analogy of parenthood. But if we are to cultivate a richer conception of the relation between creator and creation, we must practice using pictures, images, and thought models from as wide a variety of human creative activities as we can. And I think some of these are neglected in theological discourse. But Dorothy L. Sayers and Willie Vanston have each probed deeply into human craftsmanship and art as an image of what God is like. God is like designer, potter, craftsman, engineer. But the work is more than functional. It has aesthetic meaning. It is truly personal expression of the author's character. God is a creative artist, sculptor, painter, pure mathematician, poet, chef. The creation is not static or cyclic. It has dynamic development at many levels. It evolves with meaning, direction, and purpose, and all its themes are woven together, building up to a climax and a consummation. God is the author of a love story, composer of a symphony, landscape gardener, film director. Further, the creation is vibrant, immediate, quivering, resonating with the personality of the creator. Now, God is like the storyteller or poet reading own work, producer, director of own play, composer conducting their own symphony. Even more remarkable, the author appears as a character within the story. Is that possible? Well, the playwright is an actor on the stage, interacting with the players. God is an autobiographer. What's more, the whole program can have a moment-by-moment dependence on God's will. It can be switched off, changed in the twinkling of an eye. God is transmitter, programmer. God is choreographer and dancer. And when the dancer stops, the dance ceases to exist. And most profoundly of all, God is lover. Creation is wakened and loved into being and becoming, as beloved responds to lover and flower to sun, blossoming in the creative warmth of love. Now, in the light of all these models of vigorous, loving human creativity, it becomes clear, I think, that many of our ways of imagining the Creator must be by themselves quite inadequate, whether it's demiurge, first cause, ground of being, divine watchmaker, the Tao, the karma, providence, life force, etc. They don't do justice. Nothing does justice, so far mentioned, to the dynamic overall sovereignty and the intensely personal involvement of a creator God. The Yahweh Elohim portrayed in the Bible and in Jesus Christ. We need to understand God's creativity to do justice to that in terms of ours. But conversely, our co-creativity is grounded in faith. Faith in what the universe is like, faith in who we are, and so ultimately faith in the character of the Creator. Looking first then at the faith of the scientist, the faith that lies behind anyone who's doing good science. I don't mean religious faith, but it's a faith nevertheless. It's a matrix of universal scientific practice. A quick summary on the left. Material reality exists. It's valuable. It's comprehensible. There's a principle of causality. There's a principle of uniformity. There's evolution. And it's reducible into many layers of study, complementary layers, needing each other. These are control beliefs. They make science possible, even thinkable. They're not generally contested as an essential foundation for the scientific enterprise, but they're not often mentioned either. But what might correspond to these in the worlds of artist and mathematician? So, the faith of a co-creator, more generally. I'm looking at metaphysical presuppositions that will underlie art and mathematics. For a mathematician and artist, there is a shared and communicable big reality beyond the material. Noetic, numinous, spiritual. It's embodied in or expressed through concrete physical forms. But for a mathematician, the abstract forms are derived from and then reflected in the empirical world. And for the artist, the forms and images are glimpsed through the natural world and the world of human experience. A big reality. Like the scientist, both the mathematician and the artist feel themselves confronted by something of great intrinsic value and seductive beauty, calling for attention, something meaningful, trustworthy, elegant, rewarding. Calls for attention, something in fact very good. Pure and applied mathematics, then, are not to be separated. All should be pursued and funded, not just the parts thought useful in the short term. Likewise, funding the arts is a central responsibility of government, regardless of discernible short-term economic benefit. How do you measure value? In place of comprehensibility for the scientist, I'll go back to that, the third, comprehensibility, becomes congruence. Congruence. Mathematician and artist assume the accessibility of this reality to minds and hands and hearts, and experience the challenge to engage, to make sense of it and understand it, and enjoy it. It feels like an invitation to the dance. There is consonance, there's compatibility, mutuality with human experience. For the mathematician, there is a confidence that there do exist solutions to our problems. And there do exist proofs or disproofs of conjectures. It's subject to axiomatic bases, of course. Eager questioning and hard work will be rewarded. The unpredictable eureka moment will surely come. That's our faith. Our understanding is partial, but unlimited in principle. We are a match for reality. We don't lose heart. There's always a way forward, even when we struggle to see it. Reality is not malicious. It's not a seductive delusion that will devour us, break our hearts. And the artist likewise expects moments of epiphany following hard, disciplined work. And that inspires more work. So there's a profound and growing confidence, whether it's in maths or art, in this vision. It will not forever elude. It's not the taunting of nightmare illusions, but it can be incarnated somehow. The principle of causality, let's go back to that. Oh, I was already there. Principle of causality goes to coherence. A nice word for the artist and the mathematician. Artist always seeks to make some sense of the big world. The lifeblood of mathematics is great problems, purely intellectual or generated by real-world interactions, and we believe they are all somehow connected by logical pathways. Our results are true or correct by internal mathematical criteria, such as deductive rigor and freedom from contradiction. But mathematical results, proofs, and theories are valued by a complex set of criteria that include something similar to aesthetics. That's the first. Secondly, depth, assessed by logical distance from well-chosen axioms. Thirdly, internal fruitfulness, assessed by connections with other results or fields in mathematics, by generality or by potency. And fourthly, external fruitfulness, applicability. Artworks are valued by less measurable but certainly comparable criteria. You have to believe that reality has an integrity, whether you approach it as a scientist, mathematician, or artist. The principle of uniformity in science, I've gone back to that, now becomes, let's call it communicability. The universality of reality. Mathematical truths are communally attained, and the proofs, communally ratified, communally warranted. Artists may follow their own muse, but the work is assessed and appreciated by others. Values transcend culture and age. Ancient artworks do not lose their artistic quality. Reality has this universality. The lone mathematician must eventually enlist another to help make breakthroughs or test validities. The musician in his loft is playing before some imagined audience. Few artists are satisfied unless someone responds to their work, however differently. There is a shared deep faith in the possibility of communicability of the realities glimpsed. And now to evolution. I think the history of art, literature, and music all exhibit the same connected, flowing streams of creativity that the history of mathematics uncovers. What's novel develops from roots in the past with many interdependent cultural streams intermingling fruitfully at successive critical junctures. It's an adventure in time, building upon prior achievements. And there's often a long delay between the making of abstract mathematics and the solving of concrete physical problems. Beautiful mathematics is its own justification, yes, but it's likely to find physical application eventually, often a long time later, and that will provoke yet more beautiful mathematics. Again, takes time. There are periodic convulsions when the processes of complexification grow overwhelming, but these are followed by a dramatic simplification through generalization or unifying of many unrelated particulars. And these are community events. Finally, the reducibility, I call that multi-layered complementarity of viewpoints. Artists address a complex, unified reality through a multitude of different approaches, media, styles, but often with a common subject or theme. An extraordinary connectedness exists between realities evoked by the voices of poets, musicians, painters, sculptors, and between the artists of different cultures. And a landscape could inspire a symphony, and a painting can inspire a poem. Mathematical ideas, too, can be approached in distinct sets of terms at different levels of abstraction. Mathematicians are not surprised when different theories find a common application or generalization, for the unity of mathematics is not questioned, in spite of the diversity of languages and styles and motives. The faith of a co-creator, but things can go wrong. We are human. Well, let's look first. I don't mean mistakes when I say things go wrong. There is bad art and bad mathematics. There are temptations to idolatry. And maybe we should look at science first. Each control belief, the ones on the left, are powerful. And if any is unnaturally isolated or wrenched loose from the context, its overall meaning and the faith of the matrix, and is overblown into a primary driving principle, then the coherence and balance of the whole is lost. Such outgrowths of elements of the matrix can aptly be called ideological parasites. And they are metaphysical commitments. It's like the control beliefs themselves. And like most ideologies, their presence is indicated mostly by behavioral characteristics of their opponents. So I have written about materialism, pantheism, rationalism, scientism. And you can see what these things grow out of on the left. Determinism, uniformitarianism, evolutionism, metaphysical reductionism, or nothing buttery. Now, it's been well argued for most of the parasites in this scientific matrix that the associated scientific methodology has usually been weakened and the scientific practice has been distorted. Quality of science has suffered. There's no time to discuss this now, but I think a rule of thumb of mathematical modelers might be relevant here. We say no mathematical model is ever adequate. In fact, the way it's put is all mathematical models are wrong. So I believe there are parallels in what we might call miscreation in literature, poetry, music, and mathematics. And the co-creativity of the miscreants, can I call them that, is compromised. What might be the parasitical ideologies in art and mathematics? Now, I've made some guesses here. This is a big question, and I'm not answering it. But I've got materialism and idealism, and I've got pantheism and aestheticism, secular humanism, elitism, artistic determinism, resistance to change or novelty, evolutionism, dialectical materialism, fatalism, metaphysical reductionism, or nothing buttery again, disciplinary snobbery. The appeal and power, just to explain again, of a parasite in any co-creative discipline derives from the importance and success of the corresponding presupposition, which is distorted when given too much weight, taken as a self-evident and all-explanatory truth. Whenever a working presupposition is treated as an absolute truth, when a part pretends to be more than it is, then the whole is compromised. So if a scientific or mathematical model is mistaken for reality, we go wrong. When an image ceases to be an image of deeper realities, it may turn into an idol and generate conflict with the coherent philosophy and the undergirding theology that spawned the Matrix. Well, there are always idols in various artistic pursuits and in mathematics. I think their effects are legion. Obsessions, isolationism, snobbery, any sort of despair, rejection, disdain, or hostility regarding other approaches or viewpoints. There's bad maths, of course, and you'll probably be sorry about this, don't have much, can't really, it's hard to talk about that in a short time. But I'll go to my last slide, which summarizes much of what we've talked about in the overall context of stewardship of the creation. Now, this is the theology undergirding what I've called the faith of the co-creator. And three qualities I want to pull out at the bottom there are implied, of qualities of genuinely fruitful creativity. They're autonomy, which I'm going to talk about in detail, mastery, purpose. And these arise naturally in good mental practice and in effective artistic, scientific, and mathematical cooperation also. It's fascinating that the power of these qualities is increasingly recognized and valued in some of the most attractive companies and successful research institutes today. Working life ethos is described in words like the following: autonomy, being offered the freedom within reasonable and clearly defined limits to work on what we are passionate about and good at and allowed to do it in our own way, not micromanaged. Mastery, knowing that we are growing, learning and improving, knowing that we are developing a special skill that will earn respect and will complement and synchronize with the skills of others. Purpose, knowing that what we do is important with joint goals that are clear and attractive, knowing that we in our work have a place in the company and in the world, and we are providing genuine value. Co-creativity then is being encouraged to exercise individual creativity, unstifled, granted license within reasonable and defined limits to explore, experiment, take risks, make mistakes, seek mastery, but always in harmonious cooperation with other co-creators within a clear and agreed hierarchical network of co-responsibility. And you'll see that this little prefix co has powerful connotations. Co-creation for cooperative science, art and mathematics reflects the dynamic of grace in wise parenting and in the human-divine cooperation project. The creatures are free to become fully themselves while always held firmly within the loving vision of the artist. The double movement of grace reflects the parent's challenge to let go the child, little by little, while always affirming that they are with the child. And we saw the dynamic of grace in those four polarities. God is both not here, hands off, and God is here, with us, lovingly involved. So an occasional miracle is a sign of presence, love, and mercy. But the functional integrity of the creation is the essential medium for our rational, responsible stewardship and co-creativity. The master has gone away, as the parable has it, and left the co-workers in charge, not micromanaging, but not ceasing to care. Grace moves then between the infinite and transcendent poles and personal and immanent pole. As we grasp our own transcendence from the creatures of our making, we have to carry out in humility our delegated responsible stewardship, made to make, created to co-create, in co-agency, in intimate engagement with both the immanent creator and the God-filled creation. It's a big responsibility. It's an enormous privilege, and the potential for co-created wonders is unimaginable. I said I'd talk a bit about autonomy. Do I have any time left for that?
You don't, unfortunately, Gavin. But it might come out in the questions. I think if we go to the questions, they've started coming in, and I think what I'm going to do is, because you've all done really nice long questions, which I think if I read them out, I will probably butcher. So what I'm going to do is I will go to those that have put them in, because I think then you can expand or paraphrase as need be. So Andrew first, and then Ellen afterwards. And obviously, if you have any other questions as we're going through, please put your hands up or stick something in the chat. Andrew.
Thank you very much for a beautiful talk. I really enjoyed it. My question, it's a bit of a kind of techie question, but can aesthetics not also be irrational and unintelligible? For example, the particular, individual, unique, irreducible, which are perceived by direct apprehension, such as noesis, without further analysis, interpretation, and discursive reasoning. If so, does this not create a potential disanalogy between at least some art and mathematics?
Thank you. Yes. I'm, of course, talking analogically, and neither mathematics nor certain particular disciplines in art will be beautiful, perfect analogies of anything. So the isolated artist, the esoteric thinker, imaginer, is there esoteric mathematics? Of course, all of this does exist. And often there are little pockets of mathematics that nobody can feel has any relevance to anything, but much later, rephrased, re-understood, expressed in a new context, they do start forming. The connectedness, I think, is an underlying faith that is hard sometimes to realize. Does that answer the question or not? Both in mathematics and, of course, in art. Sometimes things are incommunicable. They feel incommunicable. We struggle. The wings beat against the cage. That happens in mathematics too. Something's
I suppose more simply what I'm trying to say is that the random, chaotic, haphazard, those kind of things can have a beauty in themselves without attempting to try to understand them and go beyond them into some transcendent world. And indeed, that's what science starts off as. Science starts off as natural history, the observation of the individual bird or the individual rock. And so individuality is a very important aspect, rather than just thinking in terms of universals and how they participate in universals. Anyway.
Wholly agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen, you're next.
Thank you, and thank you for this paper. I really enjoyed listening to it. I was particularly intrigued by the concept of the imago creatoris, and I wanted to ask if it seems to me that it could fall into the same pitfalls as the substantive interpretation of the Imago Dei, where, for example, if we say that the Imago Dei is human rationality, well, not all humans are rational. Infants are not rational. Temporarily unconscious humans arguably are not rational. And I wondered if the same kinds of problems might face the Imago Creatoris, because not all humans are creative or not in the same way. There are some humans who don't have an imagination. They can't have mental images in the same way that other humans can. Again, temporarily unconscious humans can't create things, nor can infants. So I was wondering if it is kind of susceptible to those kinds of criticisms that face the substantive interpretation of the Imago Dei, or if it has ways of getting around that.
Of course, I think the dangers are always there, and not everyone can begin to be a mathematician. It's an extreme case. We're very different, and individuals, it's hard to imagine a human individual that isn't being creative in some genuine sense that we can't tap into or write down. It doesn't fit with any of our preconceptions. But humans do have this gift, the potential. Let's see it as that. And I would hate to define what the Imago Dei is in terms of any of the usual things. And there was certainly part of nature. There's a continuity there, and every beast is part of us. That's probably what I was going to say under my autonomy. It's autonomy of creatures, down to a stone. Yes, it's hard sometimes to see how creatures are exercising their freedom, how creatures are exercising their co-creativity. But I believe it's still the best way to see ourselves in terms of all the things we do that are just so, we know we're almost being godlike. And even children playing games are showing the godlikeness. They're making up, they're just creating worlds all the time. How else to describe it? We are like this. All right, not each one of us is the same as each other. We can't even recognize it sometimes, but this is how we are at core, in essence, as a community of humans in the world. Thank you for pointing out the dangers there. Temptations are everywhere.
Luca, you're next.
Yeah. Thank you, Gavin, for the very good presentation. I would like to ask, in the beginning, you also mentioned that God could be seen as a mathematician. And I was thinking about the consequence of that vision. Would it not imply that the natural world become very deterministic if everything is kind of, if there is like a pure mathematician behind it? And from this point of view, I would like to know how you see a completely random event, things that cannot be predicted, because it's also possible. There is also probability, not only pure mathematics. And the final question is, when you mention beauty, you also add on the right column pantheism, if I remember correct. And my question is, why not saying that beauty is a reflection of the divine rather than an indication of the presence within creation of but like a reflection of the divine? Thank you.
Starting backwards, I expect, is best. Well, that's in everybody's minds. I am not aware that there's anything I've said that denied that. It's very much a reflection. We reflect. And a creation reflects in its value. The word beauty came in quite a lot in my thinking there. The way we approach the world as a mathematician or an artist or a scientist, we are seeing the value in the world, reflected, yes. And we see the value in each other, in our minds being congruent with that. There's huge reflections of who God is in what God has made. And that is why I believe an artist is such a wonderful way of approaching this mystery. Reflected, yes. Beauty, absolutely. And beauty way beyond what a scientist can appreciate or a mathematician. The randomness, I think the burden of my talk has been that we are free, that there's a letting go, that the Creator is all those things on the right-hand side, personal, the upholder, sustainer, immanent, contemporary, living with us, having let us go. There is no determinism going on there. Oh, that's your first question. The randomness is beautiful. How did you put that? The problem with the randomness is this part of divine action? Now, I think what I wanted to say there is that the problem often arises is precisely one of these temptations to make a scientific framework, a scientific model, whether it's a cosmological model or physics, into all reality. Reality is way beyond these models. These models are tentative, provisional, they are constructions that we have made of the reality. Reality is much bigger than any of our models. And scientists often struggle with that. They find themselves within this framework. It works so wonderfully. They've learned to run with it, and they find it hard to conceive all that's messy outside that. I think that's often the problem with randomness. And your first question about mathematics, God is a mathematician. That would be a dangerous statement on its own. I fully agree, which is why I think I made the point we need a huge variety of models of human creativity. You go to a novelist and look at the freedom the novelist gives the character. I mean, most people find themselves hard to imagine themselves as a mathematical concept, but imagine we're characters in a story, a divinely produced drama. So we live in a sort of epistemological tension between the character frame and the author framework. If you like, I like to say we dance in the dialectic between freedom and providence, human decisions, divine strategy, and we're dancing freely within creaturely constraints, of course. And we're not dancing to a puppet master, but to a divine choreography, and we learn to enhance the dance if we choose. And we improvise. This is where these models of creativity come in. We can improvise freely, and the creator can improvise within creaturely constraints, of course, again, and we can learn to harmonize with divine music. And then mysteriously, if we choose to do that, we are also chosen. These are the deeper mysteries of divine, or creature creation relationship. We can cooperate freely, and we learn freely to co-create. So Shakespeare makes his hero Hamlet speak and act in a certain way, but Shakespeare's a brilliant playwright, and so the character Hamlet is acting entirely in accordance with his own derivative being and his own free intentions as a man. And if that wasn't the case, it would be a bad play. So a kind of co-agency going on, but real freedom going on inside the story.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. I'm aware there are a couple of extra questions in the chat, but that is all we've got time for. So thank you ever so much, Gavin. A really different insight as ever, and it's really appreciated. Thank you. Lots to think about.